Welcome to the ReRooted Podcast with Francesca Maximé, trauma-sensitive mindfulness meditation teacher and poet. Together, we'll take a closer look at approaches to transforming trauma with insights from psychology, neuroscience, spirituality, social justice, and the creative arts. Join Francesca and her guests for an exploration of our shared connection and how we can cultivate greater compassion for ourselves and for others. If you'd like to support Francesca and the ReRooted Podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Francesca.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of ReRooted on Ram Dass's Be Here Now Network. I'm Francesca Maximé. So thrilled to be with you today. And we are continuing to really explore our own rooting into ourselves, rooting into one another. And what does it really mean to have that shared connection where we're all sort of linked, not really ranked, and enjoying what it's like when we can give life to one another in much the same way that the trees have been shown to do and are part of our whole network. Part of our network here today for this edition is a really amazing duo, I'll call them, sort of like Batman and Robin here. We have Dr. Percy Ballard and we have Kate Lingren. They're Boston-based. Percy is, Dr. Ballard is a psychiatrist and Kate's a psychotherapist. And they do a lot of implicit bias training. And I came across them while I was working on a program for internal family systems, which does part work that kind of explores a little bit about how our different sort of elements can come in, or fetters, as the Buddha might say, and what we might be able to do when we're not so much aware that they're there. And what we might be able to do to kind of bring some compassion and understanding to them and kind of open up what that means to allowing for a wider shared connection. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us and welcome Kate and Percy.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful that we can do this work together now with this technology. It wouldn't have been possible before. This is the first time I'm doing it with both of you. So I'm going to sort of play with this a little bit. Do you have either one of you either reflections or thoughts about anything that I said so far, or do you just want to start talking a little bit about your work?
Well, I want to just say I love the metaphor of the trees, and we, when we're teaching IFS, particularly with couples, we talk about the aspen trees, where they're, I wish I had a photograph to show you. I hadn't even thought of it, but all connected underneath. It's really one tree. And that in those huge aspen forests, all those trees are part of one system. And I love that you use the tree metaphor because that's how we think of our community, human community. Percy and I, yeah.
Beautiful, thank you.
It's so literal too, because they're, let's see, as far as the I don't know if you've familiar with any of the books on attachment. I think there's David
Wallen?
No, Dan Siegel.
Oh, yeah.
Dan Siegel, as far as the neurobiology of how very literally our neurobiology is connected and we are a greater system. When viewed in that way, there's a greater interconnection and of course that's the basis of Mahayana Buddhism, and so it's taking that very literally, we feel one another. And we affect one another all the time.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And I love that in certain communities, that's really like in the vernacular, right? Like, I feel you, and that's kind of what that, Dr. Joy DeGruy was talking about that and how that really is, it means something, right? It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So maybe Percy, starting perhaps with you, just around the ideas of what you were introducing off camera initially, in terms of maybe the three things that we might explore together today.
Sure. So when we do workshops on implicit bias, and I guess the word workshop or training might not be the best, because it's not like you go and you get trained and you have it. It is a really active exploration into one's own implicit bias and how one understands it in themselves, how one explores it in others, how one gives and receives feedback about implicit bias. So our workshops are really, I'd say, 4 parts. One is just introducing to what implicit bias is, how it affects us in the world, how it manifests in the world, just so we have a familiarity with it and what it feels like and what the subjective experience of it is like. So, how it manifests in just, feelings, little automatic thoughts, behaviors that we see and people point out in us. Then we get to what it looks like in everyday conversation when it shows up and it's in your face, and what that does inside of you when you see it. And also what happens inside of you when someone points it out to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all have, as we'll probably get to later, anti-bias parts, but either shame bias when we see it in ourselves and others, or hides it from us so we don't get shamed, or defends us against it so we don't get shamed or feel shame. Then there's the concept of working with implicit bias in oneself. So becoming more curious about it. And actually seeing, acknowledging it, not from the standpoint of, okay, it's okay that it's there and we don't want to do anything about it, but, if I had this inside of me, wouldn't I want to know something about it? Wouldn't I want to know that it was there so that I could help change it?
And just to pause for a moment, because I should have asked you in the beginning to just sort of really explain what you mean by implicit bias, because I'm not even sure that everyone is as clear as perhaps we are, or some folks in the audience might be, because I think that in some ways we may not even really know what that means, or it might mean different things to different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kate, would you want to take this one?
Sure, although you're speaking so beautifully. You're on a roll there.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well, go ahead, Percy. Go.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So implicit bias are the little ideas and associations that we have that we're not necessarily aware that we have. So the idea that we associate woman, the concept of being female with rearing a family, and the concept of being male with having a career. Those are associations that we have from a young age that are just in us. We didn't put them there. Our environments, the media and the people that we have been around have put that in us, and we're biologically wired to have these associations.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that we're biased to believe or to look for that we're not necessarily aware of, and they come out in the way that the things that we expect to see in the world. They come out in little feelings and tendencies, and they importantly affect how people are able to live their lives. So, for example, it will affect someone's implicit bias will affect if you're a CEO, whether someone will invest in your company. It comes down to the gut idea of, do they think you can do the job? And the reality of whether they perceive you as a certain race or a certain gender is going to affect that, because that is the way that we have been programmed by our society. So that's, for example, but it affects who gets a call back for a job. If someone submits an application that says Jane Smith versus Letitia Smith, inevitably Jane Smith will get more callbacks, even if it's the very same application. It will, and of course, it will affect, as we've seen recently, as far as can go to the level of affecting who lives and who dies, who is seen by a police officer as carrying a weapon when they raise their hand versus being unarmed. And so this has been, all 3 of these things have been proven, and there's so many other ways that it does. In healthcare, for example, who gets pain medication when they report the same amount of pain, who gets a cardiac catheterization or a procedure, So all of these things affect people's livelihoods, people's life, and people's death. So that's why we see it as important to really work with it. And there are all sorts of ways that it manifests that can be hurtful in our microaggressions with one another.
Right. Yeah, I like to think of it as, you know, another way of saying it is implicit bias is unconscious bias. It's also called that. And we all have it. We really want to normalize it, that, you know, we've innocently picked up all kinds of beliefs that we didn't consciously take on. And what we do is try to access those unconscious beliefs and biases so that we can really work to get them to soften and not be active in the way because every moment of every day, our unconscious beliefs are influencing our choices, where we go, who we see, what foods we're choosing in the grocery store. I mean, everything. And so if we can access these beliefs, particularly the ones that are getting in the way of what we call self-to-self connection, open-hearted connection, we have a way in using IFS to really help these beliefs understand, I'm just moving into another area for a second, understand that they don't have to influence us in the way they thought they did. And then, we'll talk more about that later, about using the IFS model. But we really want to normalize that we all have these beliefs and they're limiting.
Right. And they're automatic.
Yeah.
We don't really have conscious control over them. Yet, as psychotherapists, we are in the business of using the tools that we have to change sort of automatic assumptions that we make. And automatic bodily reactions that we have. So we work with phobias, we work with addictions, we work with panic attacks.
Yeah.
We work with, aversion to certain environments that remind us of something bad. We are in the business of helping people to change their neurobiology, to change their automatic reaction to things. And if we can use it for that, why not use it for something that is also automatic and also painful and harmful to all parties involved, which keeps us from connecting with one another? So we use those very same tools, and in our case, a specific set of techniques in internal family systems to address this other set of problems that, or this other set of just human phenomena that happen, and help us to connect better with one another.
Right.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I really think that's the goal. And as a mindfulness practitioner and teacher, I think that the most fundamental thing that I've really come to understand is that we're sort of getting back to what's already here, to the way things really are, right? From that, sort of non-dual, larger perspective, cosmic. I mean, we just did this whole black hole discovery, picture the other day. I mean, it's like crazy to think about. We are just these little specks down here, and yet, what are we made out of? Stardust. Who is here, right? What is here in me? This little thing that walks around or brushes her teeth or maybe doesn't, I don't know. And how is that connected? And how does that translate into us being connected? And just this remembering, this sati, this coming back to our own shared connection, it just gets in the way. It's just, the clouds over the sun, but we're
right.
It's there.
Right.
And so these techniques, these ways of looking at it can be really, really helpful, I think, for folks. I know it's been helpful for me. And also the piece about compassion. So you're connecting to self and other. So this is a piece of both and.
Absolutely.
So thank you for for that. And I apologize that I didn't start with that. And Percy, I don't know if you want to pick up with where you left off, or if you could even remember, or just you just keep going from where we are right now.
Well, yeah, something like that. I mean, so in our programs, we introduce implicit bias. We introduce how to work with everyday encounters in implicit bias when it shows up. We help people to work with their own implicit bias, and also maybe particularly for therapists, but it really wouldn't matter, how to help other people work with their implicit bias when we see it in them, and to go through the we actually teach the layers of what's behind implicit bias.
Mm-hmm. And we teach this partly through role plays, where we show what it looks like, and then we kind of unpack that. That really illustrating that we see biased beliefs as protectors. And in internal family systems, there are basically, two kinds of parts: protectors and exiles, the parts that are protected, or vulnerabilities. And what we have come to understand in our conversations and in our work together is that biased beliefs are in the service of protecting some vulnerability, real or perceived. And it's amazing to think of it that way, because as with any other protector part, the more we understand its concerns and its intentions, the more we can help it. We can update it and help it understand that it doesn't have to be doing that job in that way.
I love that. That is so critical, is that, again, this idea of developing these biased parts as a way of protecting our vulnerabilities. So we're really just trying to stay safe.
Yeah.
Or what we believe is what we need to do to stay
right.
safe. Or perhaps what we might have had to have done at one point to stay safe in our environment, that no longer do we need to do or have to do these quote unquote protectors in the internal family systems language. Aren't aware of that yet, maybe.
Right.
And the layer above that is that we need to get past, is that there are parts of us that have bias, which Kate described, which is something that is protective to us. We also have parts that keep that bias implicit so that we can't access it. And this is something that Kate and I had to work with to figure out, okay, how do we get past those parts that don't want us to see our own bias, that are really defensive, that either hiding it or shaming it in some way, so that we can access it, so that we can ask those very questions that Kate was saying. How did this bias get here, and what is it trying to do for us?
And because to have a biased belief often means we're bad people. So many of us hold that. If I'm biased, that means I'm bad. And so those protectors keep it out of our awareness, or else we would, the risk is we see ourselves as bad. Right. And this is kind of how I got interested in implicit bias, was, in the large IFS community, hearing from colleagues, I'm not racist, I'm not homophobic, and me saying, great, that's great. And then hearing things that might suggest otherwise, right? So it's true, the belief is I'm not homophobic, I'm not racist. And then other things come out like, well, I'm not homophobic, but I really, I'll make something up, things like, based on real things I've heard. But my daughter came out to me, and I just cannot wrap around her being married to another woman, for example. But I'm not homophobic. And really hearing that more and more, once you start to listen for it, you can hear it. And I hear it in myself. I mean, I'm not excluded from any of that. And then realizing, okay, so that's implicit bias. We really believe we don't have these biased beliefs because we're invested in being good people. And how liberating is it to think, I'm a good person and I have some beliefs that are biased? I have some parts that hold biased beliefs.
Right.
And I can get curious about that. I don't have to shame it and exile it.
Right. In the sense that it's a natural function
Mhm.
of the human brain. The human brain, probably most of what it does is it categorizes. It categorizes
Yeah.
things, and it categorizes people and places. And right, we have to know whether there's a, really, viscerally, if we're, roaming through the Serengeti, we need to know whether something is, a lion or a plant, or, okay, when we don't necessarily we can't necessarily go through and think, okay, this is a mammal. Let's see, it's furry. It has a mane. It's probably a lion. I should probably get out of here. We need to learn
Yeah.
to like viscerally we have an automatic mode of thinking that is a fast track. It's more emotional, more limbic system based, that has to help us make these decisions
Yes.
very viscerally, very fast. And so this is part of the fast pathway, but we need to categorize things. We categorize people, places, and things. And sometimes our brain happens to learn to categorize things and people and places in ways that really aren't as helpful to our system. And we want to help it to be more, accurate and mindful about how we categorize.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And so as we're talking about this, we don't really, that it's adaptive, right? Like there's a reason why this is here, right? But it's,
Yes.
are we confusing, the finger pointing to the moon for the moon? Or, like the way that Joseph Goldstein will talk about it, the noting piece around, are we able to, do we have to say it's an apple? Or, is it just seeing? Do we have to say it's a lamp? Or can we just say seeing?
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
so there's that mindfulness piece practice that can be helpful in terms of how we conceptualize how we're dealing with these parts. Like what, you know what I mean? And with our relation to what arises, at least does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we automatically are conditioned and I think for good reason, to say apple as opposed to saying seeing. And that in that meditation, you're becoming mindful and being really focused on how your mind actually works and how your mind does. If you're focused or concentrated enough, you will be quick enough to recognize that, okay, this has color and shape, and it's kind of crystallizing into something, and then my mind is labeling it, and it says apple, and then it goes to all the memories I've had of apples. Right. I know what apples taste like. And so watching your mind in the way that it is conditioned to work, and so that is a meditation to help your mind do that. And yes, it does that with apple. It also does that to when we assign gender to people, it does that as well. So, okay, this person is most likely, most likely for most people, they have the gender binary condition into them. So this person is male or female. They are probably, they probably are of X race, even down to, this person probably is more likely to have a career that is athletic versus a career that is, that is in leadership. So there are automatic assumptions that we make. And it's hard to see all of that. We can't be conscious of all of that. That would just bog us down. Yet, when we recognize that we're categorizing incorrectly, or even in a way that's hurtful, we need to have tools to examine that. Just like we have tools to examine, what we do when we see an apple.
Right. And that's beautiful. And I'm going to let you jump in, Kate. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention is so there's really a part of this. This is very adaptive. This is helpful. This is what we need. So we are not going to be eaten by the lion in the Serengeti or whatever it is, right? Like we know that that's part of evolutionarily why we are sort of, categorizing, compartmentalizing, whatever. And then as the Homo sapiens sapiens, the ones who are aware that we are aware, which is a lovely quality if we can engage it as adults, that we can then look at that and see, okay, well, is that what's necessary right here, right now, in this present moment? And then to your point, what of that operationally that's happening that I'm not even aware of is pulling me into quicksand that I'm not even aware of, or creating damage or hurt to myself or to others.
Right.
So Kate, I don't know if you want to go with that, or if you guys maybe want to do an example of something like excuse me, you tell me what's next.
Well, we could do a role play and then we could unpack that. According to the kind of the general IFS, internal family systems model that we've adapted to work with bias. And then we could do it in what we call in internal family systems, a more self-led way. And just so people know, in IFS, the term self means a bunch of different C words. We tend to describe it as connected, compassionate, curious, calm, centered, creativity. There are 8 of them, and I usually get around 6. Percy, what am I missing? Caring, that kind of energy. When we're in that energy, that's our true essence. That is us, right? And most of us have moments of that. It takes practice to really live more in that energy. And so what our goal is to bring more self-leadership to our conversation, to our internal work, and to our conversations. So then we try to show the same scenario, but in a self-led way, in a role play, so that people see the difference. Would that feel helpful?
Well, I think people like examples, right? And so I think that is helpful. And so it's basically just saying, okay, here's the first. So just for listeners, the first way is going to be like how we normally would get caught, or how we might normally get caught. And then the second way is when you're coming from your best Buddha nature self, or your best, sort of drop into your deeper, large S self, your presence with a P, whatever you want to call it. When you're sort of coming from that place, and not from these reactivity parts, when you're responding and you're not reacting.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, how about that?
Well, we have a bunch of them. What do you think, Percy? You want to do?
Oh, I have a hat here. Do you have a hat?
I do. I'd have to go get it.
You have to go get it?
Great. So now we're going to have Kate and Percy do a demo of what it might be like if we were not coming from a quote unquote self-led place, a place of more presence, where we're more susceptible to being caught by our implicit biases.
Right.
Take it away.
Okay.
See if we can get closer to the camera so people can see what's on the hat.
Yeah, there's a Cleveland Indians hat that Kate put on right now for anyone who is listening to the audio of this and not watching the video.
So, hey, Percy.
Hey, what's up with the hat? Never seen you wear that before.
Oh yeah, it's my Cleveland Indians baseball hat.
Yeah, that's racist, right?
What? What do you mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're wearing a hat of a Native American that is bright red, has a big smile, and it's basically it's cultural appropriation. It's making money off of someone else's suffering.
Oh, what are you talking? What? This is the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, logo. And that's racist.
Oh, come on, Percy. I think you might be overreacting here.
Of course, it's easy for you. It's easy for you to say as a white woman that I'm overreacting.
Whoa! Oh, so that's how we're going to be? All right.
That is, well, it's what you're bringing in here. Like you've defined the way.
What is up with you?
That
I've never seen you like this. Wow.
Okay, so time out.
All right.
Did that? So as we do that, I don't know if that seemed productive to to anyone watching.
Well,
What did you feel
yeah,
when you
let me
saw
just
that?
let me just sort of what it triggered in me,
Yeah.
right? So just me watching this with you and listening to it with you, and I would encourage anybody who wants to check out the video, if you're just listening on the audio, to watch the video on YouTube. Is that when Kate put on the Cleveland Indians hat, she was doing as I know many sports fans do. They're just sort of thinking it through the lens of, I'm supporting my team. This is what the team happens to be called.
Right.
What it
Right.
means to whatever. They haven't done exploration necessarily around what does it really mean to be called the Cleveland Indians as opposed to something, I don't know, I'm from Boston also, so I guess the Red Sox, right? I don't even know what the origins of that are. Hopefully that's nothing too ridiculous, but looking at Red Sox, it could be, I don't know. I don't know what the Red Sox mean, actually. Something terrible. I don't even want to know, but it's not as incendiary as the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah.
And so for those who, are being more aware and culturally responsive and culturally sensitive, there has been obviously a lot of conversation around the Cleveland Indians, the Washington Redskins, these sports teams, and about whether or not they could change the name. And what would that mean? And is that so bad if there is a genocide of indigenous people in this land called Turtle Island to many, that is now what we call the United States of America, that has a legacy of genocide and chattel slavery and all of whatever that might mean. So I'm hearing Percy's role play be one who is sort of calling attention to that, saying that this is racist, and Kate saying, well, this is just my hat and my sports team. What do you mean? I root for these guys. They won the World Series or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, another aspect of this is the way Percy came at me, right, was sort of attacking, and I couldn't hear what he was saying. I just had to defend myself, right? You're accusing me of something. Naturally, that would evoke a protector part. I am not what you're saying. That is not true for me. Right?
Right.
You're the problem. You're overreacting. So the blaming. Right. It's a very unhelpful, as you can see, it's an unhelpful conversation.
Right. And it's not like I'm necessarily saying things that are not true and are not worthy of being heard.
Right. But when delivered that way, in a shaming, angry way, I can't hear it.
Right.
Yeah. And I love, go ahead, Percy, go ahead.
Yeah, we want to look at saying, saying we don't want people to avoid having those conversations or to avoid bringing them up. We just want people to do it in a way that works and is actually productive and brings them the results that they would want to have.
Yeah. Right. Beautiful. And just to sort of bookmark that you're saying is, I think that a lot of people who are, that they call certain things out and they're just like, whatever. It's more about what, in the mindfulness training that I've done anyway, we're talking about, well, what's the deepest intention? What's your deepest intention underneath it? And can we be in touch with that so that when we come forward to share or express or to try to educate or to elucidate or whatever version of it that may be, to have greater clarity around the full picture of what it means, that it isn't just coming from this place that feels hurt or angry from within us.
Right.
And then can perpetuate a cycle.
Right. And from a clinical point of view, I would say, I think shame is one of the most uncomfortable, if not the most uncomfortable human emotion. And shame protectors are fast and intense. Right. And I will often say, I don't like being on the receiving end of a shame protector because it will take your face off. Right. Yeah. So there was my anger was like, I'm getting angrier with Percy because and I'm not thinking this consciously, but unconsciously, my shame protector is angry with Percy, blaming him. You're overreacting so that I don't get overwhelmed with shame that I have done something bad.
Yeah, it gets lost.
Yeah.
Real true essence of what it was trying to do gets lost because the way the message is being.
Yeah, right.
So this role play is an introduction to a concept of what we call it's a certain layer in implicit bias. And in this case, in my case, and I think in case two, it's called an anti-bias. And so this is, of course, in IFS, we have, as we mentioned, we have parts, and we have self that is, akin to Buddha nature, akin to just where we are as mammals when we are not being threatened. And in this anti-bias part, that is the part of me that sees the hat and gets angry, says, okay, that is something wrong. It's doing harm in the world. And it's wanting to do something about it. It is wanting to change Kate or change something about Kate. And this part is intended to help make the world safe. It has a great intention. It is wonderful that there's a part that comes up and informs me that, hey, there's something going on here that's not right.
Yeah.
When this part actually feels like it needs to not only inform me and allow me to respond to it mindfully, but actually take over and respond itself in in anger and blaming and that sort of thing, and try to change Kate through shaming her, that it leads to a response that it actually didn't want to get. It actually wants to help Kate and help change the world, but it's not doing it. It's just actually causing Kate to dig in her heels. And that becomes a lot of work.
Right.
And now imagine it brings out a part in you, Kate.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Francesca.
No, you please.
What it brings out in me is not, oh, wow, let me take a look at this and tell me more. What it brings out in me in that delivery is, I'm not bad, right? It triggers shame. And then it doesn't even register as shame. In a nanosecond, I'm responding with anger. You are being overly sensitive. Right. And, but I love what you're saying, Percy. And this is so important to us, that those reactive parts are they have a positive intention. Yeah. They want to make the world better. So how about we show what we would call a more self-led way of having this conversation?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, which, by the way, isn't easy, but is definitely doable.
And worth it. And we do
it. And so worth it.
And we do it in messy ways. Like, we don't hit the ball out of the park right away. We just keep practicing. And that's the whole point of why we call any of these practices practice.
Yes.
Whether it's, it's meditation, mindfulness practice, whether it's kirtan and you're chanting, whether it's dancing or piano playing. I interviewed Michelle McBride the other day. He's a Grammy-winning bassist. I mean, you've got a lot of practice before you're going to get to that point, right?
Yes, right.
We're practicing. But what are we practicing? Because we're always practicing something. But what are we practicing? Are we practicing with intentionality and moving forward into something like this where we're unpacking? Or are we practicing whatever it is that we've been programmed to do or conditioned by, in which case that's going to be what grows. And so we want to just sort of unpack some of that conditioning. So please go ahead with your self-led demo.
All right.
Sure.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah, ready.
All right. Hey, Percy.
Hey, Kate. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready. First, do you mind if I share something that's going on inside of me right now?
No, of course not. Go right ahead.
Okay, cool. Well, so I'm looking at your hat, and it actually brings out something in me. I don't know if I can explain it, but I start to feel really, really sad and really just a sense of pain as far as what I just think of what happened to an entire, race, as we call it, of people in this country. And I feel hurt.
Oh.
Yeah. And I'm kind of registering that, I don't know if you feel this way, but it registers to me that there are a lot of people that are making a profit off of someone else's pain when they put a Cleveland Indian, or when they put an Indian or a Native American on a hat, and it just strikes me as something that Yeah. What's this
Yeah,
like for you to hear that?
I totally hear what you're saying. And I'm a little embarrassed to say it never struck me that way, but I totally get what you're saying, especially because I know you have some Native American history, but you
Yeah.
ancestry. And I'm feeling like it was kind of insensitive for me to wear this hat.
Hmm.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Can I
Mm.
also share something I'm just curious about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I don't even know if you're able to answer this, but I'm curious about what would you mentioned like it feeling it was insensitive, and I'm
Hmm.
wondering what would cause one. I guess there's an aspect. It just feels like there's an aspect that wasn't aware that this could be hurtful to people.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Right. And I want to look at that. Um, and as we're talking, I'm realizing, this hat is very special to me,
In what way?
separate from what you're saying about the logo, because that's where Polly and I had our first date, was at a Cleveland Indians game.
Wow.
And I got this hat all those years ago. And so when I see it, quite honestly, I just remember that evening and how special it was to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But now
yeah,
I'm seeing it differently. Yeah.
yeah. I can see that it would make sense. That hat means something different to me than it means
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
you. But yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make you aware of what that
Yeah. I
hat
appreciate that.
does mean to me, and actually a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that you don't want to wear that hat and have the effect that you're having, which I know you're well intentioned, which is why I'm bringing this up.
I appreciate that. No, I don't want to wear something that's going to feel hurtful to other people. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm
Mm.
glad we talked, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot not finished here, but I also feel like we could we could move on and go have lunch if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's keep talking. Mm.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good. All right,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Mm.
Thanks for hearing me.
Mm. Okay. So you can sense, this is a tall order
Yeah,
to
that's
have a
the end of the
conversation like this.
right.
We're not suggesting it's easy. Um, what we do notice that in real life, the more I practice noticing my biases, accessing the implicit biases, and working with them, the easier it is for me to have these kinds of conversations.
All right.
Right. So the more you bump up against it and then have to process it and grok it a little bit, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a little easier
Yeah,
over time.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and mm,
go ahead.
sure, like to even give a play-by-play of what that's like. What Kate said is that as I've been doing this work with Kate and coming to examine and see that I have parts that have taken in bias from the world, and actually going down deep and realizing where that bias came from, it makes it a lot easier to understand how bias can be present in
Right.
other people in ways that they don't know, in ways that they don't even want it to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes me much less reactive when I see bias and more responsive. I
Mm-hmm.
don't, I definitely, I mean, back in the past, like it would have triggered me, made me angry, and I wouldn't have said anything because I want to contain my anger. Um,
So just let me pause there. So you would
sure.
shut down and you would bite your tongue basically because you would be angry when you would see that kind of a hat, but you wouldn't say anything at all because you would just shut down. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And then as you continue to do these things and realize what gets triggered in you, and then you work through the processes, then you're able to then come forward and engage in the kind of a conversation that is more generative, like the second one that you just had, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the one that is more reactive and sort of coming from the hurt part that was more like the first one. Is that right?
Yes, in a productive way. And I'll tell you that scenario actually came from something that happened in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation actually happened very similar to the way that it happened just now, because of work with, my own parts around race and shame and that sort of thing. I was less reactive, and I was able to do something that I never would have done in the past. I never would have talked about race in the past.
Yeah.
So yeah, this work really does help someone to be more effective and bring about change that they would want to bring.
Totally. And in internal family systems, we have a technique called speaking for our parts versus speaking from our parts. So the first scenario was both of us speaking from our parts, right? In angry protectors, right? The second scenario, Percy and I both were able to speak for or on behalf of parts. Like I was able to say, wow, there's a part of me that's feeling embarrassed that this didn't register with me in this way, that I didn't see it. And by being able to connect with that embarrassed part and speak for it, it didn't take me over, and I didn't need an angry protector to make Percy bad or wrong.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying, because I think that so many people can identify with this. They know, people will know, I'll know when I'm speaking or writing or whatever it is from a place of anger, which is very different from allowing the anger or the energy, as my friend Lama Rod Owens talks about, having the energy of anger be present, noticing what that is, why it's arising at this time, and then again, working with it in such a way that I can explore, what is this here to tell me, right? And then how am I going to respond to the situation? So we're really just talking about, am I speaking from my angry place or from my sad, overwhelmed place, or whatever version of it, or for it? Like, this is really what they're wanting. This is really what they're needing. This is really what they're hoping for. And can we, as my friend Terry Real might say, connect and protect at the same time?
I think that's beautiful. Francesca, I like what you said with regard to that, because it's not about not being angry.
Right.
Of course, anger is going to be there. Of course. And so it's the difference between when I think about the difference between speaking for anger and speaking from anger, the angry part would basically just say, F you. Speaking from the angry part, speaking for the angry part would say, yeah, I'm angry right now.
Or a part of me is angry.
Part of me is angry right now.
Right.
And so you are owning your own anger and saying that it's there.
Yes.
And that's the key, Kate, I think, when you talk about shame, right? Like, there's so much out there that the angry part, you talk about primary, secondary emotions, all these things, if in psychological terms, but underneath it, I just think of it as layers of shale. There's rage and anger and irritation and annoyance. And what's underneath all that? Sadness, fear,
shame,
worry, shame, concern, fear of annihilation, whatever it is.
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, again, not fracking for real, but in this case, let's go down.
Yes, let's go down.
And figure out what's down there.
What is the vulnerability, or in IFS, what is the exile that anger is protecting? And I also like to say, protectors don't travel alone. So if you're hearing anger, the more we practice, the more we can automatically remember, okay, here's an angry part. There is a vulnerability right underneath it, or the angry part would not need to be reacting like this.
Yeah.
Right? And that is just such rich territory to explore.
Yeah. And we use this personal example between two people because it comes up a lot. And it's obvious that it takes a little time to do this, and we have to be willing to give it the time.
Yeah.
And so not every space is going to be the right time or place, perhaps, to have this conversation.
Right.
It's clear in the role play that you were friends, you were, people knew one another, and that you were sort of exploring this together as it was coming up in real time. And we certainly have plenty, I think, of those kinds of relationships in our lives, if we're fortunate, where we could maybe move into it if we've started to do these practices and awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to just pull out, as we begin to wind down with our conversation here today, into the broader society at large and how this manifests and how this can, they say, like, one drop in a bucket, I mean, we can do our heal yourself, heal the world, whatever version you want to use of that. But how this helps with all of the things that we're seeing right now on the national, local, global stage. That's big stuff.
Yes, big stuff. Yeah, and there are things we can do. Like when Percy and I first started working with this, I made a decision I'm a voracious reader. I confess, mostly novels, nonfiction. I made a commitment to read only things written by people of color. And I said, I'm going to do this for a year. And now I'm well into my second year. And I have to say, it is really transformative to just absorb. When I read, I'm just in that world, absorb the experience of people not like me, right? And last weekend, we did a workshop with the Boston Law Collaborative and saw a video with, I'm blanking on her name.
Mazarin Banaji?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who was it?
So once again, Mazarin Banaji.
Oh, right. The implicit bias. Yeah.
She wrote.
Researcher.
Yeah. She's done amazing. She's designed the implicit association tests with others. And she wrote last year's bestseller, which is called Blind Spot, which is fabulous, by the way, for anyone who wants to read a little bit more about this. Right. Anyhow, she said she took her own implicit association test around race. You can get tests to look at access implicit bias around all kinds of topics. But she took her own test around race and saw she's got implicit bias that she would have said she didn't have any after all the work she's done. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, what she did to counteract that is she put photographs of people of color all around her office so that her norm are to see, and there are, all people we would recognize, most people we would recognize, Maya Angelou, Martin Luther King, who else was there? Percy. Yeah, Gandhi, right. It was just an amazingly effective action she could take that would continue to help her transform her internal experience. And then she's different in the world. Right. And so we can bring it out into the world. And you're right. We're talking about one-on-one conversations, but we can have broader experience.
Well, those are beautiful examples of embodiment, right? Like, because you're practicing what it is by reading these African-American authors, you're practicing a little bit of, again, walking a mile in another person's shoes, right? And then she's practicing the familiarity of what it is to be in community with, even if, through her photographs or whatever, to be really in community with people who don't appear just like me or who have different experiences than me. Right. On the outside or because of our societal, conditioning, as opposed to on the inside, how we all know what 99%, you're the Dr. Percy, but mostly we're all the same DNA. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, the implicit bias test is implicit.harvard.edu if one's interested in taking that test.
Yeah, I've taken them and they're not pretty on my end either.
Right.
It's kind of remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, and they offer them around ableism, around racism, around sexism,
homophobia, totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so once you see it, then we can work with it. It's not just enough, we don't think, to become aware of it, but to really make a commitment to work on undoing some of these beliefs toward becoming a more fully embodied human being.
Yeah. What comes to mind, I'm not sure how much time we have, but just briefly, like how
as much time as we want. I just don't want to keep you guys all day.
Oh, okay.
But we have as much time as we want. I have until 1.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are 3 I guess, in my mind, three things as far as giving feedback, and probably a couple of steps with regard to working with one's own implicit bias, that I'd like to put out there. So with regard to, I think since we're on working with one's own implicit bias, I'd invite people to kind of, if you're going to do this work yourself, you can contemplate a bias that you see either out in the world, or a bias that you see that you want to work on in you, and think about how it manifests out in the world, in what ways that it manifests, and images might come to mind, and just think about how that feels. And probably there's going to be some anger, some wanting to push it away, and kind of contemplate what it might be like to see that bias in oneself, to even have the possibility of this bias being in you. And for most people, that's not a good feeling. Most people, that feels there might be either defensiveness or resistance to that idea, or shame. And just ask ourselves, if there were this bias in us, hypothetically, would we want to see it? Would we want to examine it, not so that we can validate it and support it, but so that we can do something about it? And if there were a way to do something about it, wouldn't you want to see it? And what if it didn't make you a bad person to have that there? What if it were part of the normal functioning of the human brain to categorize people and places and things, just like the brain does? And wouldn't you want to discover the ways in which we do it that's not productive? And so, if we can allow ourselves the curiosity, can we take a look at ways that biases might come up inside of us, holding it in curiosity and openness? So, in that sense, are there any thoughts or feelings that are automatic behaviors that you're aware of that might be a sign of bias? And can we get curious about that? We really hold it in open curiosity, and then ask ourselves, where did this come from? Where did we learn to do this? Where did we learn to feel this way? Where did we learn to have those automatic thoughts? And are you able to imagine yourself at a time when you learned that and took that in? And can you interact with that young one in a way that helps them to learn something that's more accurate for them, that's different for them? Is there a part of you that is being protected by holding this belief? And can we be with that part in a way that we need to be there with that part? And so really being there with those young parts is what helps us to actually access the parts of us that have taken in that bias, and being with them in a helpful way. And also in the way back up, way back to the surface, we can, once we see that, ask ourselves, okay, do we really need to shame ourselves for having this? Or do we kind of understand how it could get there? And do we really need to shame others for having this? Or can we go ahead and take a more helpful role and help them with it?
Mm.
So that's kind of a brief sample of what we might do in a guided meditation. And that was really quick, but the ones that we have go really more in depth and more slowly to help us really elicit these layers and elucidate these layers, and work with them in a way that actually helps to bring out internal change at each of these layers. So that's one just sample of the kind of work that we do.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's actually reminding me of a couple of things. Again, my mindfulness teacher, Jack Kornfield, he always talks about loving awareness. And he's like, he always ends all of his retreats, or at least I feel he does. I shouldn't say always, never, anything, but again, I should on there too. So let me just restart that by saying times when Jack says that he talks about loving awareness, he will say, trust it. It's your true home. And this business of trusting it, this loving awareness, this self in presence, this that as we work with these parts, as we begin to recognize that we can separate out that there is a response that we may have that doesn't also mean that we're a bad person.
Right.
That
Yes.
they aren't coupled together, in somatic experiencing language, that we can uncouple them, or in some ways, in IFS language, internal family systems language, we can unburden them to do what they really want to do,
Yes.
right? So that you're allowing your true self, your loving awareness, this part, as you're cultivating, pulling apart the layers and stuff, and a capacity for that to shine forward, to connect, while also having all these other pieces of, I can remain boundaried. It doesn't mean I'm walking around open-heartedly,
Right.
walking up to every person saying
Right.
that, you are going to be my best friend. Yes, you're my brother. And if you're holding an Uzi, I am not just going to walk into you and start jumping in your face. It's just not wise.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we're suggesting this, the multi-layered place, but this business of going deep inside, like you just led us to, Percy, I think is really that meditative process that we're pretty familiar with, which is, who are we really? What are we really wanting?
Yeah, there's a movie by Robin Hauser is the director producer, and there's a quote at the end of that movie that really struck me, and I'm forgetting. I don't know who actually in the movie said the quote. I think it was a lawyer who works with implicit bias. But it says, if you believe that you have it, if you believe that you have implicit bias, and you believe and understand that it has consequences to the people around you in the world, then the only question left to ask is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Mhm.
And if you don't believe you have it, and someone does an exchange, as you pointed out in the demo, that might indicate you could have it,
Mhm.
are we willing to just open up one molecule of possibility,
Yes.
of
Right.
awareness around that, and move into the space that you just mentioned? Is, okay, well, can I allow that to be there? And then what shall I do?
Yeah.
Right.
If it were there, hypothetically, would you want to see it? Would you want to be aware of it?
Right.
So that you could do something about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. That's what I always say. You got the mold in the basement or the termites in the basement. We just keep shutting the door. Ain't gonna get better.
Right.
House may crumble.
Right.
And as we wind down, Kate, parting thoughts, or anything you want to share that we can share in this frame?
Really extending an invitation. The greatest gift we can give ourselves is the willingness to do this work, to take a look at it. And there's good news. The good news is we have a way of, not just our way, there are other ways too, but the way we have a way of working with it that will lead to so much more freedom individually and in the world. And that's really good news. We're not stuck with it. So I invite everyone who's listening or watching to join us in this work.
Beautiful. Thank you. Percy?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think there's always so much more to be said, and so much more opportunity. It was a rich discussion today, and it makes me grateful, and it gives me hope that there are people who are curious and that want to tune into programs like this to really examine what's happening inside of us that is making the world unsafe for lots of people. So I think it's beautiful for anyone who tuned in. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you, Francesca, for what you bring to the world in this program and all of your work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, much appreciation for you.
Very generous of you. Thank you so much. And for anybody who wants to find you online, they should go to...
Yeah, you can go to implicitbiasoutsidin.com. That's the name of our program, Implicit Bias from the Outside In.
Kate and Percy, thank you so much. I am so grateful and look forward to reconnecting with you again, or always just staying connected in our heart.
Yes, that would be great. Okay,
Take
thank you.
care. Bye.
Mhm.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.